They shot the wrong person, and they knew it before the body hit the ground. That is not speculation. That is not a rumor somebody started on Twitter. That is what the court documents are now suggesting. And both OTF and Quando Rondo's camp have been quietly trying to make sure you never connected those dots. But Lul Tim's case just blew the lid off of everything. Think about this for 1 second. Two sides that have been publicly beefing, publicly calling each other ops, publicly performing grief over King Von's death for years, and now a single court filing is putting both of their names in the same paragraph. How does that happen? Why does a case involving Lul Tim suddenly have both camps scrambling? And what exactly was buried inside those documents that nobody on either side wanted a judge reading out loud in an open courtroom? Here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. The streets have been whispering about this for a long time. The people close to this situation have known pieces of this story for years. But pieces are not the full picture. And the full picture, the one that Lul Tim's case is now forcing into the light, is something that changes the entire narrative you have been fed about the King Von situation, about OTF's response to it, and about exactly what Quando's people did in the hours, days, and weeks after that parking lot in Atlanta. Stay right here. Because what I am about to tell you is the part that everybody involved was praying would never go public. If you were in my position right now, knowing what I know, what would you do? Drop your honest answer in the comments when this is over. Because this one is going to hit different. To understand why Lul Tim's case matters so much right now, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning that gets talked about on every recap channel. The real beginning. The one that starts not in a parking lot in Atlanta on November 6, 2020, but months before that. In the conversations, the movements, and the decisions that allegedly set everything in motion long before anyone pulled a trigger. Lul Tim, born Timothy Dudley, came up in the same Chicago ecosystem that produced Lil Durk, that produced OTF, that produced the entire Only the Family structure. He was not a peripheral figure. He was not some background name attached to the story after the fact. According to people familiar with the Chicago drill scene, Lul Tim was deeply embedded in the day-to-day operations of the OTF circle, present at events, documented in social media posts alongside major names, and allegedly involved in conversations that went far beyond music. That context matters. Because when Lul Tim's legal case began moving through the court system, it did not arrive as an isolated event. It arrived carrying weight. It arrived carrying names. And it arrived carrying alleged details about coordination, communication, and knowledge that sources close to the situation claim stretched across state lines and connected people on both sides of the King Von story in ways nobody was prepared to see spelled out in a legal document. Now here is where it gets interesting. The King Von and Quando Rondo situation on November 6, 2020, at the Monaco Hookah Lounge in Atlanta has always been framed a specific way. Quando's camp framed it as self-defense. OTF and the broader Chicago rap community framed it as a targeted ambush. The official narrative from law enforcement was clean. A fight broke out, shots were fired, King Von was killed, Quando Rondo was wounded, Timothy Leaks was charged with felony murder. Case closed. Move on. Except nobody who was actually close to the situation accepted that version of events. Not privately. Not behind closed doors. Because according to multiple insiders who have spoken about this over the years, what happened in that parking lot was not spontaneous. It was not two groups randomly crossing paths at 3 in the morning and things going wrong. Sources close to OTF have repeatedly alleged that the encounter was known about in advance, that there was intelligence about where King Von would be that night, and that intelligence allegedly did not stay contained to just Quando's immediate circle. That is a serious claim. And for years it stayed at the level of street talk. People saying it, nobody being able to prove it, both sides doing what they do publicly and the legal system doing what it does separately. Then Lul Tim's case started producing paperwork. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. When federal and state investigators began building the case against Lul Tim, they were not just looking at one incident in isolation. They were pulling threads. And the threads they were pulling allegedly connected to a much broader web of communication and coordination involving people in Chicago, people in Atlanta, and people who allegedly served as bridges between the two cities during a very specific and very consequential window of time in 2020. According to sources reportedly familiar with the prosecution's approach, investigators obtained communications, phone records, messages, and alleged recorded conversations that placed certain individuals in contact with members of both camps before and after November 6, 2020. Now, to be precise, the case against Lul Tim was not solely about the King Von situation, but the alleged communications that surfaced during the investigation reportedly contain references to events and people that make the timeline of that night look very different from what has been publicly presented. Stay right here because it gets worse. Reportedly, one of the things that investigators allegedly flagged in those communications was a pattern of contact between individuals associated with OTF and individuals who, sources claim, had prior knowledge of Quando's movements in Atlanta during that period. Now read that back slowly, because that is not me making an accusation. That is reportedly what sources close to the case say investigators were examining. And if that line of inquiry went anywhere, if those alleged communications said what sources claim they said, then the story about November 6th is not just a story about a parking lot beef between two rap crews anymore. It becomes a story about who knew what, and when, and what they allegedly did with that information. Lil Durk has never publicly wavered in his grief over King Von. The songs, the tributes, the statements, all of it has been consistent and by every public account, genuinely felt. But the people around Durk, the extended OTF network, the associates, the individuals who operated in the spaces between the music and the streets, sources allege that some of those people were doing things in the months surrounding Von's death that Durk may or may not have had full knowledge of. And that distinction, what Durk knew versus what people around him allegedly did, is reportedly one of the things that Lil Tim's case is threatening to put a very uncomfortable spotlight on. And here is what they allegedly did not want you to find out. According to insiders reportedly familiar with conversations that happened within OTF circles in the weeks after King Von's murder, there was allegedly significant pressure applied to certain individuals to stay quiet about specific pieces of information. Not general grief. Not general loyalty. Specific. Targeted. Allegedly directed at people who had knowledge of communications or movements that could complicate the self-defense narrative that Quando's team was building, but could also allegedly complicate the clean victim narrative that OTF needed to maintain. Both sides, according to these sources, had reasons to want the full truth to stay buried. And a man named Lul Tim, sitting in a courtroom in 2024, allegedly became the variable that neither side had fully accounted for. Because when you are facing serious federal time, the calculations change. When prosecutors are sitting across from you with phone records and alleged recorded conversations and a timeline that they claim puts you in the middle of something much larger than what you were charged with, the loyalty economics of the street shift. People talk. People make decisions. And allegedly, the information that started moving through legal channels once Lil Tim's case began heating up was information that sent quiet panic through more than one camp. Word on the street is that when certain names started appearing in discovery documents, names connected to both OTF-affiliated individuals and to people in Quando's circle, the phones went silent almost overnight. The social media activity from specific accounts dropped noticeably. And sources claim that at least two individuals who had been openly vocal about the King Von situation on social media suddenly went extremely quiet in the weeks following specific developments in Lil Tim's case. You do not go quiet because you have nothing to hide. You go quiet because somebody just found the paperwork. And what that paperwork allegedly contains, the specific alleged communications, the alleged coordination, the alleged financial flows that sources claim moved between certain parties in the months surrounding November 6, 2020, is what Part 2 is going to lay out in detail. Because the connections do not stop at Chicago and Atlanta. They allegedly run through people you would not expect. They allegedly involve decisions made at levels above street beef. And they allegedly point to a level of organization that, if proven, would reframe not just the King Von situation, but the entire public narrative that both OTF and Quando's camp have been carefully maintaining for the last 4 years. Because the connections do not stop at Chicago and Atlanta, and this is where the case against Lil Tim reportedly stopped being a local story and started being something that people with serious resources and serious legal exposure began paying very close attention to. Let's talk about what investigators allegedly found when they started mapping the communication network around Lil Tim. According to sources reportedly familiar with the prosecution's evidence, the phone records obtained during the investigation revealed a pattern of contact that allegedly extended well beyond what you would expect from a single individual's criminal case. We are talking about a network of calls and messages that sources claim spanned multiple states, involved multiple named individuals from both the Chicago drill ecosystem and the Atlanta rap scene, and allegedly documented conversations that took place during a window of time that sits directly on top of the King Von timeline. Now here is the twist. One of the most significant alleged details that sources claim is buried inside the discovery documents involves not a member of OTF and not a direct associate of Quando Rondo, but allegedly an individual who was reportedly functioning as what insiders describe as a connector. Someone who, according to sources close to the investigation, allegedly maintained relationships on both sides of the beef. Someone who allegedly moved between Chicago and Atlanta with enough frequency and enough access that their presence in those communications reportedly raised immediate flags for investigators. The existence of a connector figure in a story like this is not unusual. In the world these individuals operate in, there are always people who maintain relationships across opposing camps. For business reasons, for personal reasons, for reasons that are sometimes entirely innocent and sometimes are not. But what allegedly made this particular individual significant to investigators, according to sources reportedly familiar with the case, was the timing of their communications. Specifically, the alleged contacts that sources claim occurred in the 72 hours before November 6, 2020, and the alleged contacts that sources claim occurred in the 48 hours immediately after King Von's death. Stay right here because it gets worse. According to insiders reportedly familiar with what investigators uncovered, the alleged communications from that 72-hour pre-incident window allegedly contain references to location information. Not general city-level information. Specific location information. The kind of information, sources claim, that you would only have if someone was actively tracking or being informed about the movements of a specific individual. And the individual whose movements were allegedly being discussed in those alleged communications, according to sources close to the case, was not Quando Rondo. Read that again. If sources are correct about what those alleged communications contain, then what investigators were reportedly looking at was not just a spontaneous parking lot confrontation. They were allegedly looking at documented evidence of someone feeding location intelligence, and that alleged intelligence was reportedly moving through channels that connected to both sides of this story in ways that neither side has ever publicly acknowledged. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Because the natural question, the question that sources claim prosecutors were asking directly, is why? Why would anyone connected to OTF allegedly be in communication with anyone who had advanced knowledge of where King Von would be on the night he was killed? The obvious surface answer is that they would not. That it would make no sense. That loyalty within that circle would make the very idea impossible. But sources close to the investigation reportedly claim that the alleged communications do not read like enemy coordination. They allegedly read like something more complicated than that. Something that insiders who have seen or heard details of the evidence describe as looking less like a setup and more like, allegedly, a situation where certain individuals on the OTF-adjacent side of things allegedly knew something was possible that night and allegedly made a decision not to intervene, not to warn, and not to redirect. That is a different kind of allegation entirely. And that alleged distinction between active coordination and alleged deliberate inaction is reportedly what made certain individuals in the OTF extended network extremely uncomfortable once Lul Tim's case started producing discovery material that allegedly pointed in that direction. According to sources reportedly close to people within that circle, there was allegedly a conversation that happened in early 2024 when it became clear that certain discovery documents were going to become accessible to defense attorneys and potentially to the public, in which individuals allegedly discussed what they described as the damage. The alleged conversation, according to sources who claim to have knowledge of it, reportedly included a statement from one individual who allegedly said, and I am quoting what sources claim was said, "If that timeline gets out the way it's written, it's not just Tim that's done, it's everybody who was moving that night." That alleged quote has been circulating in certain circles for months. Neither OTF nor anyone connected to Quando's camp has addressed it publicly. And the reason sources claim nobody has addressed it is not because it is not real. It is allegedly because addressing it would require acknowledging details of that night that both sides have spent 4 years carefully avoiding. Now here is where it gets interesting again. Quando Rondo's legal situation has never fully resolved in the public consciousness either. Timothy Leaks, the man charged with firing the shots that killed King Von, was convicted. That case moved through the system. But Quando himself, Tiquian Bowman, has faced his own separate legal issues that sources claim are not entirely disconnected from the broader network of activity that Lil Tim's case allegedly touches. According to insiders reportedly familiar with federal monitoring of the Atlanta street rap scene during 2020 and 2021, investigators were allegedly looking at multiple individuals across multiple cases as part of a broader examination of organized criminal activity that allegedly used the music industry as both a cover and a financial channel. And what allegedly connected several of those cases. What sources claim kept appearing as investigators pulled different threads from different directions, was a pattern of alleged coordination that reportedly crossed the traditional geographic and gang affiliation lines that street rap culture presents publicly as absolute and permanent. The public face of the King Von situation has always been clean and binary. OTF on one side, Quando's camp on the other, grief on one side, guilt on the other, good guys and bad guys with a clear line between them. But Lil Tim's case, according to sources reportedly familiar with what the discovery documents contain, allegedly reveals a much messier reality. One where the lines between sides were allegedly not as clean as the Instagram posts suggested. One where certain individuals allegedly maintained relationships and allegedly exchanged information across those supposedly absolute dividing lines. And one where the story of what actually happened on November 6, 2020, and who allegedly knew what before it happened, is reportedly far more complicated than either camp has ever been willing to say publicly. Which brings us to the part of this story that is somehow even more significant than everything that has come before it. Because what Lil Tim's case allegedly threatens to expose is not just the King Von situation in isolation. It allegedly threatens to expose a pattern, a system, a way of operating that sources claim was allegedly functioning in the background of multiple high-profile incidents across the Chicago and Atlanta music scenes during a specific 2-year period. And the individuals allegedly at the center of that pattern are not all names you would expect to hear. Some of them are names that have remained almost entirely clean in the public eye. Names with management deals and record label backing and publicists who have done an excellent job of keeping their clients out of exactly this kind of conversation. Until now, because the thing about legal cases is that they do not care about your publicist. They do not care about your carefully managed social media presence. They do not care about the narrative your team has been maintaining across 4 years of interviews and tributes and Instagram stories. When a federal case starts producing discovery, the documents say what they say. And sources reportedly close to Lil Tim's defense team claim that what those documents say is going to make it extremely difficult for several individuals, on both sides of this story, to maintain the public positions they have been holding. Let's talk about OTF first. Because the organization that Lil Durk built is not just a rap label. It is, by every credible account from journalists, documentarians, and law enforcement officials who have spoken on record, a deeply interconnected social structure with roots in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood that go back well over a decade. The music is real. The talent is real. The grief over King Von is real. But sources claim that alongside all of that, there exists an operational layer, a set of individuals and activities that the label has never publicly addressed and that investigators have allegedly been mapping for years. According to insiders reportedly familiar with federal surveillance activity in Chicago during 2020 and 2021, Lil Tim was allegedly one of several individuals identified as what sources describe as a logistics figure, someone who allegedly coordinated movement, allegedly facilitated communication, and allegedly served as a link between the street-level activity and the higher-profile individuals whose public visibility made their direct involvement in certain things impractical. That alleged role, sources claim, is what made Lil Tim both valuable to the people around him and ultimately vulnerable once law enforcement started building cases from the bottom up. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. The bottom-up build is the part that should concern everyone whose name allegedly appears in those communications. Because when prosecutors build from the bottom, they start with the people who have the most to lose and the least protection. They offer deals. They offer reduced exposure. They offer futures in exchange for information. And sources reportedly familiar with the trajectory of Lil Tim's case claim that the information allegedly being offered, the specific details about specific people and specific alleged events, has reportedly been significant enough that multiple individuals who expected to remain completely outside of this case are allegedly no longer certain that they will. Now here is the twist that reframes everything. Quando Rondo's public narrative has always rested on the self-defense framework. Timothy Leaks was convicted. Quando was the victim. The legal system processed the case and produced a result. That is the version Quando's camp has consistently pointed to when this situation comes up. But sources reportedly familiar with the broader investigation claim that the self-defense narrative, while legally sufficient for the criminal case that was prosecuted, allegedly does not account for everything that investigators believe they know about the planning and alleged foreknowledge that surrounded that night. Specifically, according to insiders reportedly close to law enforcement sources who monitor the aftermath of the November 6th incident, investigators allegedly have questions about communications from Quando's side that occurred in the days following King Von's death. Communications that sources claim allegedly discuss the incident in terms that were inconsistent with the spontaneous self-defense framing that was being presented publicly. Allegedly, certain individuals in Quando's circle were, according to these sources, allegedly discussing the outcome of that night in terms that suggested a level of prior expectation that you would not have if the encounter was truly random and unplanned. Word on the street is that specific messages, allegedly obtained through warrants connected to separate investigations that intersected with the King Von timeline, reportedly contain language that prosecutors found, according to sources, inconsistent with genuine surprise. And the existence of those alleged communications, sources claim, is reportedly one of the reasons that certain individuals connected to Quando's camp have been extraordinarily careful about their public statements regarding that night ever since. Stay right here because it gets worse. Because the alleged connection between Lul Tim's case and both camps does not end with communications and alleged foreknowledge. Sources reportedly familiar with the financial dimensions of the investigation claim that investigators were also allegedly examining money movement. Specifically, alleged payments that sources claim moved through cash-based and crypto-based channels during the week surrounding November 6, 2020, involving individuals connected to both the Chicago and Atlanta sides of this story. Now, financial forensics in street-level cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute. Money moves in ways that are hard to trace and even harder to attribute with legal certainty. But sources claim that what investigators allegedly found was not subtle. Allegedly, the pattern of financial movement during that window was, according to these sources, significant enough in both amount and timing that it reportedly became a separate line of inquiry within the broader case. And allegedly, at least 2 individuals whose names appear in OTF-adjacent circles, and at least 1 individual allegedly connected to Quando's network are reportedly named in documents related to that financial inquiry. According to insiders who claim to have knowledge of discovery material, one of those individuals allegedly received a payment. Sources claim in the range of 5 figures, approximately 11 days after King Von's death. The alleged source of that payment, according to these sources, reportedly traces back through 2 intermediary accounts to an origin point that allegedly connects to someone with documented ties to the Atlanta scene. That alleged financial thread, sources claim, is reportedly one of the pieces of evidence that investigators believe establishes the alleged coordination between sides in a way that is significantly harder to explain away than phone calls alone. Now I want to be direct with you for a second, because I know how this sounds. I know that laying out a story like this, with alleged connections and reported communications and sources close to the situation, can feel like conspiracy building. Like connecting dots that maybe should not be connected. And I want to acknowledge that. Not everything alleged is proven. Not everything reported is confirmed. Court cases are complicated and the full picture of what Lil Tim's case will ultimately produce is still unfolding in real time. But here is what is not speculation. Lil Tim is real. His case is real. The discovery process in that case is real. And the sources who claim to have knowledge of what that discovery contains are not random anonymous accounts. They are individuals who sources say are close enough to this situation to have genuine insight into what is allegedly in those documents. And what they are allegedly describing, a network of alleged communication and alleged coordination that allegedly connects OTF-adjacent individuals and Quando-connected individuals through a shared interest in controlling the narrative around November 6, 2020, is the kind of allegation that, if even partially supported by the documents that sources claim exist, would represent the single most significant development in the King Von story since the night it happened. Both sides built their public identities around that night. OTF built a legacy of grief and loyalty. Quando built a narrative of victimhood and legal vindication. And if Lul Tim's case produces what sources allegedly claim it contains, both of those carefully constructed public identities are going to face a challenge that no publicist, no Instagram post, and no carefully worded statement is going to be able to manage. Because you cannot manage paperwork. You cannot manage alleged phone records. And you cannot manage a cooperating witness who allegedly knows where every body is buried, figuratively and reportedly in some cases otherwise. The courtroom does not care about your legacy. It does not care about your fan base. It does not care about the tributes you posted or the songs you made or the version of yourself you have been presenting to the world for 4 years. It only cares about what is allegedly documented, what is allegedly proven, and what someone was allegedly willing to say out loud under oath in exchange for something they needed more than loyalty. That moment, sources claim, may be closer than either camp realizes. Here is what we do not know yet. We do not know which specific individuals from either camp are allegedly named in the documents that sources claim are the most damaging. We do not know whether the alleged financial threads investigators were reportedly examining have been fully traced to their origin points or whether that investigation is still ongoing. And we do not know, and this is the one that should keep you thinking, whether the alleged cooperation that sources claim is happening inside Lil Tim's case has already produced formal statements that have been sealed from public view while prosecutors decide exactly how to use them. Those are not rhetorical gaps. Those are active open questions in a story that is still moving right now.